everybody. Me and Joe from Balsa, USA. Welcome to episode 4 of the Beginner Build series. This week I'm going to show you how to tackle pretty much finishing up your fuselage, and I'm also going to show you how to repair a mistake. I actually cut the wrong hole in the top. I followed the plans wrong. I looked at the picture wrong, and I show you how I went in and corrected it, and you won't even be able to tell it was there once you get the paint on. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and happy building. So the next step in the instructions for the tricycle gear version is to lay out the hole on the bottom for the steering control rod to come through. You can see here I've already got my hole laid out, and I'll walk you through the process. It was simply a case of measuring the bottom view on the plan sheet from the F1 former to the distance that I needed to be away from there, and then plotting out the rest of the dimensions based on the size of the hole that it shows on the plans. So what I simply did was place my ruler here, measure back 5/8 of an inch from the flush with the F1 former, made a mark here, and then I used my combination square to transfer that line to the other side. The reason why I did it that way is because, as you can see here, to get the measurement in the right place, my gear block was going to be in the way. So I transferred the line from this side where I could get a good measurement over onto the other side, and then that'll be my starting point. Then it was a simple matter of measuring the distance on the plans from the outside of the fuselage to the corner of the hole for the steering control rod. Once I had that point down, I measured the distance here, then I measured the distance here, and then I just connected the lines all the way around. So how I'm going to get this hole opened up is I'm going to use my 5/32 drill bit and drill a hole on each ends in the middle, and then I'm just going to use my hobby knife to connect the holes. You want to be careful not to go too far through. Remember, you're only going through this one piece of light ply. Now it's simply a matter of connecting the dots with my hobby knife. Then the next step is to lay out the hole on the other side of the fuselage. So this would be the top side. You need to lay out a hole here too, and just use the exact same process that you used for the last one. Measure up from the F1 former according to your plans, make your mark, and then build your lines from there. So one of the things that you might find useful for this step is if you picked up the 4-in-1 Zona saw from Balsa, USA, it actually has 4 different blades to use. This smaller blade is going to be perfect for connecting these lines. And then you just continue on like that for the rest of it. So I wanted to talk about a mistake I made in the last couple steps. I misread the manual. This is the first time I'm ever building this one, and I cut this control rod slot out way too big. I realized after I cut it that I'd made the mistake. So I just wanted to show you how easy this was to fix. All I did was cut a scrap piece of 1/8 inch plywood and fit it to this slot. I took the measurements and I got it cut, and I put it in there. I used thin CA to tack it in, and then I put thick CA over the top and worked it down inside the little bit of crack that was right on this end, and then sanded it flush. So that will be like it was never there. I just wanted to show you that mistakes can be easily fixed. The control rod slot was supposed to go here. I misread the instructions and put this long slot in here, but it was easy to fix. This is all good to go. It's solid as a rock and sanded flush. So when I get the fuselage painted, you won't even be able to tell this is here. This is perfectly flush, and when I paint the fuselage, you'll never even see it. Okay, so the next step says to position the fuselage over the top view. The problem with mine is going to be that I am building the tricycle gear version, so that the gear block in the front is going to be in the way of me doing that. Okay, so what it says to do is clamp your fuselage to the workbench using C-clamps. The way I've got my bench set up, that's going to be very difficult to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my fuselage sideways enough so that I can get my gear block off the front, and then I'm going to use T-pins to clamp this down. What I do suggest doing is taking your spare sheet of 1/8 inch plywood and sticking it underneath the rails in the back. That way you're going to be making sure that you're flat all the way down. And then all I'm going to do is do the same thing that we did earlier, is I'm just going to pin the fuselage down using pins. I'll use the T-pins and push the pin right down onto the wood there with the pin in forward. What this will do is this will hold my workpiece down so that it doesn't move around while I'm trying to glue on the fuselage sides. What you want to do is you just want to make sure that you give yourself enough room to install your fuselage sides. So now that I've got that pin down to my workpiece, I can fit and check to make sure that I've got plenty of space, and you can see here that I do. Okay, so before you do this, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and use a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill your holes. The punch marks are already going to be in the fuselage sides, and I also went ahead and marked 1/8 inch space on the end. You need to line 1/8 inch up behind the fuselage top, the floor top, so that way when you do your former in the back, it's flush. So just go ahead and mark a 1/8 inch line, and then you can use that to line your pieces up. So it says the next step is to glue this down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my 1, 2, 3 block to check for squareness and to try to keep from making a huge mess with my CA, because this is going to want to run down towards my board. All I'm going to do is I'm going to get everything lined up like I want to, and then I'm going to fold this back like this and put my glue down in that space, and then butt it up here like this and hold it until it dries and tacks a little bit. What you can do is once you get your glue placed, just make sure you hold it tight up against your workpiece, because it is going to want to run down in between, which is fine. We have wax paper down, but there's no sense in wasting a lot of glue. So what I'll do is I'll run my glue down inside, and then I will spray a little kicker, and then I will fold up the sides and hold it just like that, and that should give me a square piece. So as you can see right here, I've got it held up there nice and tight, and you can see by the picture that it is square. You'll want to do the same step to both sides. I will use thick for this step, and I've already got everything lined up. I'm using my 1/8 inch overlap that I drew my line for, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this back, keeping it up against the fuselage side, and then I'm going to run my thick CA down inside this space here, hit it with a little kicker, and then fold it up. Okay, you just want to make sure that your line is where it's supposed to be, and you want to make sure you hold it tightly so it doesn't move around on you when you do this step. Again, you can figure out your best way of doing this. I'm trying not to waste a lot of glue, so for me, I think this is going to be the best step. So I'm just going to start right here, and I'm going to apply a liberal bead of thick CA all along this edge. I'm going to hit it with some kicker, and I'm going to fold it up. You're going to want to work down the back side of it so that it seats all the way down. And give it a few seconds to set. I can feel that ply starting to warm up a little bit. That means that the glue is activating good. And that should be solid. All good. Perfect. You can check it for squareness. Right on the money. So now what I'll do, just to make it easier for myself to be able to see it, I'm going to turn these pins so I can lift this off of here. You can keep the pins in place where they are. And I'm going to lift this up, and you can see when I lift that up, there is hardly any glue runoff. I don't have any glue on my plans. Okay? That's just a way to try to not waste as much glue. I try to conserve as much of it as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it in the other direction, get my gear block off the side, and primarily this is just going to be so I can see. My original plan, now that I see this, isn't going to work, so I will need to repin this. I was trying to leave those pins in place, but that's not going to work. Pin the front down. Use your piece of extra 1/8 inch plywood on your fuselage side rails just to make sure that it's nice and flat. This is the advantage to having a nice flat workbench. You can move this stuff around and it doesn't matter. Your workbench is flat in all directions. You don't have to worry about finding a low spot. I'll pin this down just like I did the last side, giving myself space to work. Just like that. You can see that that's solid. Down to the bench, good to go. Just like that. On there nice and solid. And then I can work on the other side. Same exact process as we did before. Okay, so the next step is to locate the F3 former. That's going to be the former of 1/8 inch plywood that's got the little dihedral cut in the top of it. So it says that I'm supposed to transfer these two holes onto this. I'm going to talk about a real quick tip. This is actually the set of plans that I've already cut off the top of my plans when I started. So what you can do is, this line here is the plywood floor. This line is the bottom of the F3 former. So what you can do is lay it on there, make sure that it's the right one, and then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go in here and cut this section out and then put the piece of paper on top of the former and mark my holes with the paper. That's going to be a lot simpler than trying to measure and find the centers, so you can save yourself some time just by putting this on here and marking your holes through the paper. It'll be a lot simpler. You're not going to lose any critical information. You can see here all that shows is the 1/4 inch dowel, and then everything else is according to this. Okay, so all you have to do is cut this section out here, and then you can lay that right on your former and mark your holes like that. It'll be a whole lot easier that way. So I've got my plans to cut to fit my F3 former here. So all you have to do is lay the former down on top, fold the paper over so that it stays in place. When I flip it over, just be careful flipping it over, you can see the spot on the paper where the holes have to go. Then all I do is simply mark my holes and drill them. So now you can see here I've got my holes marked, and then all I'm going to do is simply drill right straight through the paper. My F3 former is still inside the paper. I'm using a couple of 1, 2, 3 blocks just to hold everything in place, and I can go ahead and drill my holes and know that they're in the exact right position. Just like that. Good to go. And if you want to double check it, you can turn this over, line up your F3 former, and check the position of your holes. So now all that's left to do is to glue in the F3 former. You're going to want to make sure that the bottom edge of the F3 former is flush against the fuselage rails. Okay? You don't want this up on the plywood floor bottom. You want it down on the fuselage rails. You may have to do a little sanding to get a good fit here, but it shouldn't take very much. Line everything up. Make sure it all looks like it's supposed to and good to go. And then glue that in. One thing I would do is I would use thick without kicker. Once I get this placed, I will place a 1, 2, 3 block inside to make sure that I get a square fit. I would use thick on this so you have some work time. So now we're going to work on the installation of the F1 former. So what you need to do, find your former, check the fit. You may need to sand it a little bit to get a nice square fit on the front. You want this inside the fuselage sides. So this will fit inside the fuselage sides. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to draw a 1/8 inch line along the edge, the bottom edge. So as you can see, this is my bottom inside edge. That's going to be your guide for your bevel. All you're going to need to do is sand a bevel right on this edge. You don't want to take any material off the front edge so that you get a smooth, flush fit on the front. So just take a little bit off at a time until you get the bevel that you need. Process for doing that is you can just lay it right down on your bench. In this case, I'll use my board. Take your sanding bar and just start taking some material off. Slide that right over to the edge of your board and just start making a bevel. Now, like we talked about before, you don't want to take too much off at a time. So what I would do is I would sand it down a little bit. And then check my fit on my fuselage. When you get this bevel done correctly, that front edge should set flush. So now it's just a matter of creeping up on that edge until you get the bevel that you need. Now you can see that I have my bevel sanded and I get a nice perfect fit with the front of the fuselage. Everything is nice and flush, and the front nice and flush, ready to go. So the next step is going to be to drill the holes for the throttle control. So again, what I will do is I will grab my other set of plans that I already cut off. And right here, you can see the throttle control rod location. Just like that. So what I will do, since I'm just drilling the one hole this time, I'm just going to measure this one instead of cutting the plans up again. So I'll just measure the distance. This is showing me the center of the hole is about 5/32 away from the edge. And 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. So I'll just make those measurements and mark my hole. So now that I have my hole made for my throttle linkage, I'm just going to go ahead and drill my hole. And we're good to go. Now all that's left is to glue the F1 former in place. You want to make sure you're between the fuselage sides and flush all the way around. Once you make sure your fit's going to work, go ahead and glue it in place. Okay, so the next step is going to be to take the 1/4 diameter wing dowels. These should be 5 inches long. If they're longer than that, you just need to cut them off and round the edges of the dowels round. If you can see this in the video, you can see how that is. So I'm going to show you a quick trick. All you do is load your dowel up in the chuck of your drill. Careful not to over tighten because you can crush the wood. Take your sanding block, start your drill, and just sand it down. There you go, just like that. So the next step is going to be to fit and support the dowels on both ends. You want to cut a piece of scrap of 1/8 inch plywood and put it between the dowel and the outside formers. You want this to be as level to the dowel as you can, so you want this to be as flush as you can, because this is going to help support the dowels, which is what your wing attaches to. So what I've done is I've taken a couple pieces of 1/8 inch plywood. Now what I've had to do is I've had to take my sanding block. This is just another extra piece of scrap, and I've had to sand this down just like that to make it fit between both ends there. Now all you got to do is take a little bit of thin and put just a little bit of thin on these pieces. The thin will do a good job of wicking into the wood, and once this sets up, these aren't going anywhere. A little bit of thin on both sides of the ply on both ends. This will solidify that up nice, and you won't have any issues with the support on your wings. Just like that. Those dowels aren't going anywhere. The one thing you want to make sure you do before you do that is you want to make sure you've got even dowels on both sides, or as close as you can. Okay, so the next step is going to be to cut and fit the 1/4 by 3/8 inch balsa stick. What this is going to do is this is going to fit along the inside of the fuselage and give the wing more of a bite from above. So what you want to do when you line this up, because of this angle, you want to get a little bit in front of it. Make your mark here in the back. And this is going to be one of the times when like when I was talking about at the beginning, where you need to sneak up on your cuts. So I'll go ahead and cut this off, and then the front I will have to work on. Because of that angle, it's going to take me a little bit of sanding to get it down to where it needs to. So now that I have one stick cut to the proper size so that it fits flush against the top of the fuselage sides, I can use this stick to mark my other stick. That way they match on both sides. I did already check to make sure it works on both sides. So you're good to go. So now you know you can take this stick and make your marks for your other one, and you'll know right then and there you're good. So what I would do right here is I would mark the line in the front just a little bit long, and then on the side I would use it to make my angle. So I know where my angle needs to be. And again, I would mark that just a little bit long so that you can sand up to it. It's balsa, so it will sand relatively easy. Now you have your angle that you need, and you also have the length that you need. So to give you an example of what I did, I took these two sticks. I'm going to flip this around so you can see maybe. I took these two sticks just like this, and I lined up the wood so that it was even on the end, and then this is the angle that I sanded to right here. You can sand right to that as your guide so that you get the same angle. So now you can see here I've got the same angle on both ends. Now I will say that the one that I just cut for this side is just a little bit long. So what I do is I bring it in and I go ahead and I mark it again just a little bit long, and that gives me the mark that I can sand to. So now all I have to do is use my sanding block to sand off that extra right up to my line, and when I put it in, it should fit perfect. Now you'll see that it's just a little bit down. So what I want to do is I want to sand a little bit more off of the end that doesn't have the angle. And again, this is something that you want to sneak up on. You don't want to take too much off at the begin with. so that you can get it up high enough so that it's flush. Now you can see it's flush and all good to go. I'll go ahead and glue these in and we'll move on to the next. So the next step says to file or sand the notches out of the bottom for your gear blocks. So you can go ahead and do that now. Now I happen to have a file for this place, but I'll show you a quick tip. If you don't have any files on hand, what you can do is you can take a piece of scrap. So this piece of scrap fits right in there. You can actually glue some sandpaper on this stick and use it to sand it down, just like this. And that'll work perfectly. So again, you don't need any special tools. You can just adapt what you have and it should work fine. Okay, so the next step is going to be to make sure you've got your fuselage lined up good with your plans. It talks about C-clamping again, but I'll be honest with you, I don't really have a good way of doing that with the setup that I have. So I think what I'm going to do is the same thing that I did on the earlier part of the build. I'm just going to pin this thing down. You're going to need to pin it down up towards the fuselage sides. This is just going to be to hold it in place so that it doesn't move side to side on you. Once you have it lined up where you think it needs to be, just put some pins along the outside edge, and that should hold it pretty good from moving around too much. And then for good measures, I'm going to go up towards the front and pin in up by the front so it doesn't slide forward on me too. So the important thing to remember about this step is it needs the two fuselage sticks need to meet together right at the center line of the airframe. If they don't meet together on the center line, then you'll have to trim one piece of the other. You want them to be lined up. I need to move forward just a little bit and repin. You're going to want them to be lined up right in the middle of this center line. So when you bring your fuselage sticks together, you want to make sure that you have them lined up and they meet right over the center line. So for me, that's going to look just like that. So what I will do is I will tack glue that so that it's together, and then I will come back and glue it up better in a second here. So I've got it set and I've got it held. You want to make sure you're real careful about this part. Double and triple check the fact that it is lined up right over the center line of the airplane. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop a little bit of thin on this joint so that it'll hold. Give that a second to wick into the wood, and then I'm going to add just a little bit more. Now what that'll do is that thin will wick into that wood and it'll hold these two pieces together. You can even hit it with some kicker for good measures to make sure that it's set. And then at that point you should be good to go. Give it a second to cure, and then you can let go of that. Just be careful, don't glue your fingers together. So now that I have those two pieces glued, then I can strengthen that corner up a little bit. And then what I will do is I will trim this up to match both sides. So now that you can see that I've got the back end cut so it's flush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a little thick CA down in this gap between the two fuselage sticks just to give it a little extra support in the back. I probably wouldn't need it, but I'm going to go ahead and do that now so that I can still get to it good. So all I'm going to do is turn the fuselage up on its end and put a little bit of thin or a little bit of thick down inside this gap between the two fuselage half sides. Basically, I'm creating a fillet down inside this hole that should hold that really good. And what I'll do with this is I'll go ahead and put some thick on it so that it sets and it doesn't get all over the place. And that should be more than enough strength for years of flight on this airplane. That'll fill that area in between those two fuselage sticks in real good. That's not going to go anywhere. Well, gang, I think we're going to make that the last step in this week's episode. Make sure you tune back again for the next one to see the rest of the build. Thank you very much for watching, and happy building.